f3 to g5.
f3 to g5. Pawn to d5.
e4 to d5.
e4 to d5.
f3 to f7.
f3 to f7. Queen to xf7 checkmate. Player wins.
Hey everybody, my name is Oscar and welcome to my channel. In this video, I want to talk about this script that I made that allows me to play chess on chess.com blindfolded. To be clear, what I mean when I say this is the computer uses its speakers and microphone in order to hear the moves I want to make, and it's also telling me the moves that my opponent made, as well as telling me other things like if the move I made was checkmate, or if I made an illegal move or something like that. And the purpose of this video is to be a tutorial on how to make scripts like this. And so I'm going to teach you how to make that script. But if you're not interested in that, and instead you just want to download the code as well as instructions on how to use it, then consider joining my Patreon. I do have the code for this project as well as the code for the other projects I've worked on uploaded there. So give that a look, and if that would be helpful for you, just because you want to play chess blindfolded, then that would be a great thing for you to be able to download. And I will say, for full transparency, that if you do plan on using this script, it currently only works against Martin. So if you do go to my Patreon and try to download it, it won't work against other AI, and it currently won't work against human players. Now, if enough of my patrons request it, I will make changes in order to make it so that you can do that. But just so you know, as of today, it currently only works against Martin, just for full transparency. But if, on the other hand, you are interested in a tutorial, then you've come to the right place. Now, personally, I have always wanted a script like this ever since I saw top chess players like Gotham Chess and Hikaru Nakamura playing chess on chess.com blindfolded. Now, whenever they played blindfolded, I did notice that they usually had another person there helping them. They didn't have like a program running in the background, and chess.com itself doesn't offer this as a feature, which I think they should. But I spent a lot of time looking for an application that would let me do this because, I don't really have anybody to sit next to me and tell me the moves, and so I can put a blindfold on. And I couldn't find anything. So I decided to make the script myself, and I thought, hey, that would make a good YouTube video as well. So that's the purpose of making this video. So without further ado, I'm just going to dive right into it. So in this video, we will be making a Python script. And in order to make this script a little bit more digestible, I plan on breaking it up into 6 steps. The first step will be to have the Python script open up a Chrome browser so that we can actually use it to play chess. And in particular, it will need to open up this Chrome browser, and it will need to open up the web page for chess.com. Once that web page is open, we're going to need the script to log us in to chess.com using our credentials. This is just necessary so that we can play a game. Now, once that login step is complete, then we need to navigate through chess.com in order to set up a game. Meaning we're going to have to click on the computer, we're going to have to click on challenge, in particular Martin, then we're going to need to select certain settings, and then once we do all that, actually click play, and a game with Martin will start. As I said before, this script is just to play against Martin, but if you wanted to change this script to play against other AI or other players, all you would need to do is change step number 3, so that instead of setting it up against Martin, you set it up against another person. Now, once that step is complete, you now have a game running. You are now a part of a game, and so we can move on to the next step, which is for the script to tell us what color we are in this game. Keep in mind that this script assumes the user is blindfolded, and so as such, the person needs to know what color they are. And so once this game starts, it'll just tell us the color first thing. And once we have that information, we can actually play the game. which brings us to step 5, which is to repeat just 2 actions for the rest of the game. And if you think about it, if we were playing with a human helping us to play blindfolded, that human would basically just do 2 things. The first thing is on our turn, if it's our turn, the human would wait for us to speak. And then once we speak, whatever audio that we give, if it's a valid legal move, that person would make the move for us. And that's exactly what we want the computer to do. We want it to hear audio output from us. Once it does, if it's an acceptable move, move the piece for us. And the second thing that we would need to be done is when it's not our turn, when it's our opponent's turn, we would need to know what move the opponent makes once that move happens. So the script would need to wait for the computer to make a move, in this case Martin, and then once Martin does make a move, they need to tell us. And essentially that's all that would need to be done in order for a blindfolded chess match to be possible. And so those 2 steps are going to run on repeat until the game is over, which brings us to step 6, which is once the game is over, it will need to tell us what the result was. If I make a move that results in checkmate, then the script would need to indicate that I just checkmated Martin and that the game is over. Similarly, if Martin checkmates me, the script will need to indicate that to me as well. Now, there is a bit of a disclaimer here. The script is not totally complete, only because, again, this is for educational purposes, and I didn't feel it was necessary to add a couple of features. In particular, if the game results in a draw, what will happen is that the script will read the chess notation, and it'll tell you that basically it was a draw, but the script is just going to hang. It won't actually finish. I didn't add the logic for that. And the second thing is that it also will not handle pawn promotion correctly. It won't go through the steps of actually selecting which piece you should promote to, so that will also kind of hang the script. In order to get around that one, I would suggest that you enable auto promotion to queen for this script, so that when you run it, it'll just promote to a queen, and you have no issue there. And you should be able to play the game just fine. Just keep in mind, if you have a draw, then it'll tell you, but the script won't stop. But that should be fine. And so in that case, that's kind of the steps. And now we can move on to the code. So for this video, I have 2 files here. I have this app.py file, and I have this blindfoldchess.py file. And these 2 files are going to have basically 2 different purposes. The app.py file is just going to essentially use the blindfold chess file, as the blindfold chess file is going to have the bulk of the code, the bulk of the logic, and that's where we're going to spend most of the time in this video. However, this app.py file is just going to be this small file with these 6 function calls here. And the reason I do it this way is so that it's a little bit more readable and easier to understand. Now, each of these function calls from line 4 to line 8 actually correspond to one of the steps that I had in the previous slide. So this first function, open chess, all this is going to do is open up chess.com in a Chrome browser. This function right here is going to log you into chess.com using your credentials. This is step number 3, which is challenging Martin. This is step number 4, which is telling the user what color they are. And this is step number 5, which is just this big while loop that repeats those 2 steps. Step number 6 is also in here, as when the script notices that checkmate happens, it just stops this function from running. And so step number 6 is also in here. This first function right here is just instantiating the blindfold chess class, because I am importing a class here. And so the reason you do this function is so that you can initialize a bunch of things that will be necessary for these other functions down here to run. So this app.py file is going to be what we run when we run this script, and all it's doing is calling these 6 functions right here, and that's all it's doing. So now I'm going to move on to the blindfoldchess.py file, as it is going to be the bulk of the logic here. So in this file, I have the 6 function definitions that you saw in the previous file. And so one by one, I'm going to fill this with code. And as I do that, you should see this script doing more and more of what we want it to do. And so I am going to start with this init function right here, which corresponds to this function that we're running right here on line 3. And again, the purpose of this function is to just initialize a bunch of stuff that we're going to need. And so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to import this WebDriver from the Selenium package for Python. And so I'm just going to have to do these 3 imports right here. And this will allow me to have everything I need in order to use Google Chrome the way I want to in this script. So in order to do that, make sure you import these 3 things right here. And inside of the init function, we need to instantiate our use of the driver. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to initialize this self.driver field right here, which instantiates a WebDriver that allows us to use Google Chrome. Now, we need to initialize a couple more things. Another thing that we need to initialize is the use of our microphone and speakers on our computer. Because again, we're going to need those things in order for this script to allow us to play as though we were playing blindfolded. And so we're going to need to import a couple more packages. In particular, we're going to need to import these 2. So if you want to be able to use your microphone and speakers with a Python script, these 2 will allow you to use your microphone and speakers via this Python script. And so once you initialize those 2 packages, then after that, you're going to need to add these 2 lines to your init function. And all these do is just give you the drivers that you need for the microphone and speakers. The first one is for the microphone, as this is what listens. And this one is the one that outputs audio to the speakers. And so once you have these 2, you'll be able to use them later on. There are going to be more things that we're going to need to add to this init class. But for now, I'm going to leave it as what we have here. And as we need more things, I'm going to add them throughout the course of this video. And so the first thing I'm going to do is change this open chess function so that it actually does the first step that we had outlined in our slide, which is to open up chess.com on a Chrome browser. And this step is actually pretty easy. In order to accomplish this, it turns out that this function is just going to be 1 line of code. So since we have our Google driver, all we need to do is use it. So we already have this self.driver variable defined up here in our init function. And so we're going to use it to get this web page. And actually that is all you need to do in order to open up Google Chrome at this chess.com web page. And now I'm actually going to run this script. I'm going to run app.py. And when I do this, it should run line 4. And all it should do is just open up chess.com at the login page in particular. And so it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because these functions don't have anything under them. And that's actually a problem. These need to have something defined inside of them. And so all I'm going to do is just add some return statements to them so that we're not going to see this error. And now that I've added those return statements, I'm going to try to run the script again. And so as you can see, it did open up chess.com, but unfortunately it didn't stay open. And the reason it didn't stay open is just because we finished running the script is all done, it has nothing else to do, and so it just stops. And so in order to have us see it for a little bit longer, I am going to add a sleep statement to the last function, play chess, just so that we can see the web page be up for a little bit. And another thing that I'm going to have to do is actually import the library that we want in order to be able to use the sleep function. So we need to import sleep right here in order to make this work. But we are going to use it for other things in this script. So I guess it's actually kind of convenient that we need to import it right now. And so now that I have that imported, I'm going to run this again. And as you can see, we have chess.com open, and we have it open at the login page, which is the first step. And so now the next step is to actually log in using our credentials. And so in order to do that, we need to open up the web page so that we can see it, and we can actually see the web elements that are associated with logging in. And once we have those, we can actually use the web driver in order to do things like fill them in with credentials and then click the actual login button. And so this here is the page that we are brought to when our script runs. And in order to fill in the login section, we actually have to right click over here on this web page and click inspect. And the reason we do this is because in order for our script to interact with this page, it needs to know what the HTML code looks like in order for us to do things like type something into the username field and type something into the password field. And it needs to know what the HTML looks like to click this login button. If it doesn't know how to do those things, it won't be able to log in. And so the first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to find this field right here, and we're going to need to input our username. And so the way that we would do that is when we right click and we click on inspect, we can see that this is the HTML code that corresponds with that field. And it has this thing called an ID. And since the ID is username, we can actually use that information in order to populate this field with text. And the way that we would do that is we would go to our login function, and we could add this function. We could add this function right here, and all this is it just grabs the web element that has the ID of username. And as we just saw, that is that box that we can input text into. And so we can define this variable called email in. It accepts an email or a username. In this case, I'm just naming the variable email, but it doesn't really matter what you name it. And now that we have this email in variable, we can actually send keys to this web element. And what this will do is it'll put a string into that element as though we were typing. And so we're going to input our username in this section. And this is a useful thing to put in your initialize function so that you don't have to define it here. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to go up here, and I'm going to add this new line to this init function here. And I'm going to set this equal, for now I'm going to set it equal to a test string. And I'm going to do this so that you can see that when I run this script again, it will actually open up the chess.com web page, and then it will put that test string into this email or username field. And so I'm going to run this right now, and we'll see that happen. So as you can see, the test text was inputted into that field, which is what we wanted. And I'm going to do the same for the password. So I'm going to open up the web page once again. And as you can see, when we go over here, we right click and we click on inspect, we can see that this is the HTML code that corresponds to that box, and we can see that the ID is password. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add the same lines of code, except the ID is going to be password this time. And so I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to add 2 more lines. And these 2 functions will do exactly the same thing, except for the password. I also need to define this self.chessPassword so that it'll actually have text to put into it. And so I'm going to define that up here as well. And now, instead of actually putting usernames and passwords into code like this, it's actually good practice to take credentials and put them into a different file. And so I have this .env file here, and right now it's just a simple file. It has this chess user variable, and it has this chess password variable. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my credentials in this file. I'm not going to do it on camera because obviously I don't want you guys to have them. But once they are in this file, then I'll be able to go into this Python script and grab them from this file. And this is just a nice way to securely use your username and password when you have code. Because, I'm going to share this code with my patrons on Patreon, and I don't want them, when I do that, I don't want them to have this username and password. And when they run this script, there's going to be this easy location for them to just add their username and password. They need to go to this .env file, put their username and password, and then this script will just work because it'll just read from those files. But in order for Python to be able to do that, we are going to need to run a few more lines of code. In particular, we're going to have to import just a couple more things, and these should be the last two imports we need for the rest of the file. And these two things will just allow you to find this .env file, and it will allow you to read from it. That is what this import right here is. It just specializes in reading from specifically .env files. And so what you'll need to do once you have those is you'll need to run this function, this load.env function. And once you run this function, it's going to automatically get those variables for you. And in order for you to access them, you just need to run os.getEnv, and then you put in the variable that you want to access. So once I run this function, and once I run this function, then whatever is stored in chess user here will also be stored here, which is exactly what we want. And we can do the same thing for the password. And now that we have that, once the init function runs, these two variables, self.chessuser and self.chesspassword, should now have the information that we need it to run. And so I'm going to add my username and password to this .env file off camera, so that when I run this script again, you should see that information being populated. So now I just added that information, and I'm going to run this script one more time. And this time you should see the username and password be updated. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to click that login button. And so in order to do that, I'm going to look at this HTML code once again. I'm going to click inspect, going to get the button for logging in. I'm going to look at this ID, and that's the first thing you need to do. You need to get the ID that's associated with the thing you're trying to interact with. And now that I have that, I'm going to add a couple more lines of code to this function. The first line of code that I need to add is actually getting that login button as a web element in Python. And so to do that, I'm just going to use the same find element function that I used for these two items up here. And I'm going to use the ID of login because that's what I saw corresponds to the button. And then once I have that, all I need to do is I need to run this click function, and this function literally just clicks the button. And once I have that done, logging in should now be complete. And once I run this script, it should open chess.com and log me in, completing the first two steps of the script. And as you can see, now I'm logged in to chess.com, and I can continue on with the rest of the script, which should be challenging Martin.